We're going to get started. So, good afternoon. Welcome back. I hope you all had a great weekend. If you had any other AP exams over the last week or yesterday, I hope they went well for you. We're almost to the end. Right? There's basically 3 more days of this class. Tomorrow, Thursday, and Friday. That's it. For most of you, for all intents and purposes, this is the last class, or second to last class. We'll see you again tomorrow. Then there's the AP exam, and then that's it. So a couple things to talk about before we get into the presentation I have for today about the AP exam. First, you need to start thinking about getting all your textbooks and calculators and anything you've checked out from the school back to the school. Right. If you checked out a laptop, that needs to be returned. Textbooks, yellow calculators, anything that was issued to you from the school that was not yours just to keep forever and ever needs to get back. Otherwise, there will be fines, and you don't want fines. So please start thinking about that. For seniors, I think your main return day is on Monday next week. I think they're starting to accept returns on Friday though as well. Or if you're at school and you have something you know you don't need anymore, take it back to the library. Right? We'll let them have it. So there's that. Make sure you do those things. Also, grades. Grades were updated yesterday. All right. Even the last multiple choice assessment that is not due till Friday received a placeholder grade. That's so that everyone knows exactly what your grade is right now. All right. So I have to finalize grades for most of you, because most of you in this course or in AP Stats are seniors. They need to be finalized by Friday. All right. So to give everyone the best idea of where you stand in the class, I updated all the grades. Everything's been entered yesterday. And anything that I've graded today is not reflected in Synergy, but it is reflected in Canvas. All right. So again, Canvas will have your most up-to-date grade. If you have not turned anything in since yesterday afternoon, Canvas and Synergy should show the same thing. All right, so check your grade. If you're happy with your grade, you have no reason to have to do anything else, to be honest. You can simply cruise into the end of the school year for AP Stats. All right, if you do not have a grade that you like, get some other stuff turned in, do some revisions, try to bolster that grade if that's something you want to do. Otherwise, again, you don't have to do anything. The grades in Canvas, the grades in Synergy reflect the grade you will get if you do nothing through the end of the semester. Okay, so look at that grade. If you're cool with that grade, cruise on through Friday, no worries. Right. Otherwise, right, if you're not at a passing grade or if you want to move your grade up, and number one thing, if you have not done the multiple choice assessments, do those. Go through and guess on all of them. It's better than getting a 0. Right? Any amount of correct answers will improve your grade. Right? You can literally go through and just guess. Give your best guess to all of those. You'll probably get some of them right. You'll get better than a 0. That'll improve your grade. Okay? So there's that. Please keep that in mind. Are there any questions about grades? Anything I can clarify? All right. Awesome. So you can opt out, like cancel your AP test up to 2 days prior to the exam. That is the final cutoff. So I don't know if you can still cancel. At least you can not take the exam, so to say. But if you paid money, you can't get a refund, kind of thing at this point. So yeah, the initial cutoff was supposed to be 8 days prior to the exam, and then they pushed it to 2 days is the absolute latest. but we're already 2 days out. Yeah, you should email Miss Booth. She's our AP testing coordinator. And she's the one who has to communicate on her side if people want to cancel. And her email is abooth, so ABOOTH at euhsd.org. She's our AP testing coordinator. So yeah, you may or may not be able to cancel at this point. Let me share my screen real quick, show you a couple of things here. I know, I mean, we're in that kind of like cram time here, so I know that, you know, I'm still throwing things at you guys, but I want everyone to have whatever it is they'd like to be able to help them study for the AP exam. So I've added 2 other modules to the course that are just resources, right? We have, and they're both at the very top of the modules if you click into modules. We have the AP exam review materials, all right? We've got this AP stats cram sheet. This was shared with me from another AP stats teacher from another school somewhere else in the country. And it is a PDF filled with like everything we've seen in this course, but boiled down to like the essentials. Goes through lots of formulas, lots of different ways that things look, different tests, different, you know, all those things covered on these few pages. It's a lot, but it is like a one-stop shop for a lot of different things. All right, and a lot of the concepts covered in the course. So there's that. The review that I did for chapters 1, 2, 4 through 10, the PowerPoint from last week about what to expect on the AP exam as far as like number of questions, how much time, all that kind of thing. I have the 2018 and 2019 AP exam released FRQs along with their scoring guides and solutions. So if you're looking to get some practice doing free response questions, those are the things you should be doing, is those practice those FRQs and then looking at the scoring guide to see how well you did. Right, that is something you can do. Just pick 1 or 2 to practice with if that's something you're interested in. Right, so I've provided the solutions essentially for those questions. Then we have the digital exam prep. This is the PowerPoint that we've seen earlier about a month or 2 ago. You know, downloading the app, what you need to do. Right, preparing for the 2021 digital AP exams. Right, this is again just a rundown of the steps you needed to have completed by now, essentially, if you're taking the AP exam. This is day of reminders. You might want to review that. It's basically saying like, hey, don't cheat. You should check in 30 minutes early. Make sure you're prepared. Yada, yada, yada. All that fun stuff. Have scratch paper. This isn't a hint for success on the AP stats exam. I'll go through some of what's on this sheet today. Again, I did not make this. I found this. And it looked like a good resource. So it talks about the exam. This is talking about the traditional pencil and paper exam, so don't take this top part into account. But the general tips are all really good. And then it goes into the different skill categories: collecting data, describing data, inference, regression, right? Those are the major skills that we've done in this course. And just goes over some of those. So it's a nice little review material thing as well. So I've put all those things there for your viewing pleasure and studying support. So they're now at the very top of the modules. So then we're going to talk about the AP exam. Where did it go? There it is. Ding, 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 ding. Cool. I'm already showing my screen, I think. Maybe. Yeah, yeah. All right, so here we go. AP exam prep review for our AP exam. It's a little bit of review, a little bit of what to expect, and a lot of AP things. Very first, you need to complete your exam setup. You have today and tomorrow. Right? It must be completed by tomorrow. If you do not complete your exam setup by the 9th, like if you wake up at 6 a.m. on the 10th and you haven't done your exam setup, guess what? You don't get to take the exam. That must be completed the day before the exam. If you wait till Thursday morning to try and do the exam setup, you will not be able to do so. So you have today and you have tomorrow to complete this step. If you log into the testing application and your test is not showing up under your exams and like, hey, you know you should have it there, it is withholding that from you because you have not completed the practice exam. This is not happening for every student, but it has happened to a few. So if you go into that the testing app and you're attempting to do your exam setup, but your exam is not showing up, it's because you have not completed the practice exam for some course, right? I don't even know if you need to do it for every course that you're doing, but if it hasn't been completed for one of your courses, I don't think it allows you to get into the actual tests. So if you're having that issue, that's what you need to do. Just get through the practice exam. When I say get through, I mean like just click the buttons until you finish it. Don't worry about having answers. Just click, 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 get through so that it's completed. All right. So there's that. Any questions about exam setup? And most of you have not completed this step yet. I think I'm up to like 10 students out of like 50 something, 60 something. Okay. Again, the click here things, those are clickable, and I have this PowerPoint loaded up on Canvas already. Those are going to documents that are in those modules that I just described previously. Once again, the exam consists of 2 sections. Section 1 will be multiple choice with 40 questions, and you have an hour and 30 minutes to complete that. Section 2 is multiple choice and free response. There will be 11 free response questions. You get 25 minutes for those, and 11 multiple choice questions, I apologize. 4 free response questions. You get 3 FRQs combining 1 to 2 skill categories, 1 investigative task that combines a bunch of things and makes you think a little bit outside the box. And you get an hour and 5 minutes to complete the 4 free response questions. So altogether, you will be testing for 3 hours. The overall experience will take roughly 4 hours between when you check in at 12:30 on Thursday to when the exam ends because of breaks and things like that. Are there any questions about what the exam will consist of? So next we're going to talk about what graders / readers of your AP exam are expecting. First, understand what you need to demonstrate to the grader. You are being graded on the correctness of your answers and on your ability to communicate the methods you used to get them. Your answer is everything that you did to get the result, not just the final boxed value. Your job is to convince the grader that you understand the concepts covered in the questions. If you only provide the numerical answer without evidence of understanding of how you got there, you will not get full points. And in some cases, you'll just get marked incorrect because you haven't provided any of the background necessary. Be smart about multi-part questions, right? Read, in the digital exam, you can move between the parts of a multi-part free response question. Right, so if there's question 1, parts A, B, and C, you can move back and forth between parts A, B, and C of question 1. Once you've submitted question 1, you cannot go back to question 1. Right? If you're already on question 2, there's no going back to question 1. All right, read all the parts before you start answering them. They might be related, or they might not. Use your work. If the final parts ask you to use the results from the previous parts, make sure that you use your results. Even if you're not sure if they are correct, you should be referencing your own results in your own work. Right? You can still demonstrate understanding of the concept even if you have the incorrect p-value and you make the quote unquote wrong conclusion, but you're doing it based on the way that those rules actually work. Okay, reference your own results. If you were unable to complete one of the parts that is needed to answer the last part, let's say you need the result from part B to answer part C, make something up and explain what you would have done. Rather than leave part C blank because you didn't know how to answer part B, if you understand what you would have done with the result had you gotten it, explain that. Explain the process. Demonstrate to the reader that you understand what you should have done here had you gotten a result. That's worth more than leaving it blank. Answer the question you are asked. Right? The questions on the exam are worded very carefully and specifically. Carefully read the questions to make sure you understand what is being asked. Once you have answered the question, stop. Don't go beyond. Don't keep writing. Don't get sucked in and just keep adding more things, right? Once you answer the question being asked, you're done. Even if it only takes 1 or 2 sentences and you feel like you've sufficiently answered the question, stop writing. There's no need to provide extra things that you can be graded on. Right? You do not need to fill the space provided to be correct. And this is more so the case when you have paper and pencil exams because they'll give you far more space than you need and students feel the need to fill that space. Not always needed. Please write your answers in context. Right, almost all the AP Stats questions will have a real-life context. Your answers must include the context. If you write a conclusion saying, because the p-value is greater than alpha, we fail to reject the null hypothesis, and leave it at that, you're not correct. You have failed to answer the question. You have not told the reader what that result means in the context of the question. You're on the right track. You have the right idea. You know that you're supposed to reject the null hypothesis. But what does that actually mean? What did you find evidence for? What did you not find evidence for? This is most important when defining symbols or variables and writing conclusions. When you're defining the parameter to calculate a confidence interval, don't just start using P or P hat. Tell the reader that P represents the true proportion of left-handed people in the population. Then you can use P and P hat because they know what it means. The context is incredibly important. Use vocabulary carefully. Terms like normal, independent, and sampling distribution have specific meanings. For example, don't say normal when you mean approximately normal. Right? Things that are perfectly normally distributed fit perfectly into that 68, 95, 99, 7 rule. All the things line up. That typically isn't going to be the case, but things will be approximately normal. Right? So make sure to say approximately normal for something that is approximately normal. Don't mix up populations and samples in either words or symbols. Remember, the variable P typically means a population proportion. It is a population, it's a parameter. Samples, sample proportions use p hat, right? Population parameter, population mean is mu, x bar is the sample mean, right? You need to use those symbols appropriately. Is there any questions? Anything I can clarify about what the readers and graders are expecting? Next, we're going to go over the scoring guide. All right, we're going to look at a sample free response question from 2019. I'm not sure if this is a question we did last week or not. Let me look. What did we do in this class period? We did do this one last week. Okay, cool. So I did different questions with each class. So, all right. So this is a question we saw last week. All right, from 2019. It's the tumbleweed question. All right. So tumbleweed, commonly found in the western U.S., is a dried structure of certain plants that are blown by the wind. Cochea, a type of plant that turns into tumbleweed at the end of the summer, is a problem for farmers because it takes nutrients away from soil that would otherwise go to more beneficial plants. Scientists are concerned that cochea plants are becoming resistant to the most commonly used herbicide, glyphosate. In 2014, 19.7% of 61 randomly selected plants were resistant to glyphosate. In 2017, 38.5% of 52 randomly selected cochea plants were resistant to glyphosate. Do the data provide convincing statistical evidence at the level of alpha equals 0.05 that there has been an increase in the proportion of cochea plants that are resistant to glyphosate? So here's our question. When we look at the scoring guide, the first thing that we see is the intent of the question. When the people at College Board and AP wrote this question, what were they looking for? Right? The primary goals of this question were to assess a student's ability to perform an appropriate hypothesis test to address a particular question. More specific goals were to assess students' ability to state appropriate hypotheses, identify the appropriate statistical test procedure, check appropriate assumptions, conditions for inference, calculate a correct test statistic and p-value, and draw a correct conclusion with justification in the context of the study. If you follow the 4-step process, you will cover all of these things by default. If we look a little closer to this, we see that the overall thing was performing a hypothesis test, right? A significance test. Right? Within that, there are 5 specific tasks that they wanted you to complete. And again, if you simply use the 4-step process, you should cover all 5 of those tasks. For the solution part of the scoring guide, they have it broken down into 3 parts. We have section 1, which is essentially the setup. Section 2 is doing the math, and section 3 is the conclusion. Once again, the 4-step process takes care of all of these. Right. In the setup, they need to define parameters based on the real-life context of the question. They need to state appropriate hypotheses and state the appropriate significance test and the accompanying formulas using the defined parameters and statistics. Right. In section 2, we need to check conditions and do the calculations, finding the p-value. You need to show and explain your work. And in section 3, we have the conclusion. State your conclusion based on your work. This must include the original context. So here is the scoring guide's suggested solution. The very first thing that they're going to do in this first paragraph is essentially define the parameters. They're defining the variables. All right, let P14 represent the proportion of the population of cochea plants in the western US that were resistant to glyphosate in 2014, and let P17 represent the proportion of the population of cochea plants in the western US that were resistant to glyphosate in 2017. Now we have defined our variables. Right, the null hypothesis, H sub 0 such that P17 minus P14 equals 0 is to be tested against the alternative hypothesis, H sub A, such that P17 minus P14 is greater than 0. Right, so now we have stated our appropriate hypotheses. Right, an appropriate inference procedure is a two-sample z-test for difference in proportions. We've stated the inference procedure we're going to use. The formula for the test statistic is z equals this crazy mess. Right. P hat 17 minus P hat 14 divided by the square root of P hat C times 1 minus P hat C over N17 plus P hat C times 1 minus P hat C over N14. Right, where P hat C equals N14 times P hat 14 plus N17 times P hat 17 divided by N14 plus N17, which is the pooled estimate of the proportion of resistant plants for 2014 and 17 combined. It's our combined proportion. We always will use a combined proportion when performing this inference procedure when the assumption, the null hypothesis, is that there is no difference. So they have clearly laid out what they want to do. Now they get to work. First, they must check conditions. This entire section right here is just checking conditions. The first condition for applying the test is that the data are gathered from independent random samples from the populations of cochea plants in the western US in 2014 and 17. The question indicates that a random sample of 61 cochea plants was taken in 2014 and a second random sample of 52 plants was taken in 2017. It is reasonable to assume that the 2017 sample of plants was in no way influenced by the 2014 sample of plants. So they have checked the randomness condition. The second condition is that the sampling distribution of the test statistic is approximately normal, otherwise known as the large counts condition is coming up. This condition is satisfied because the expected counts under the null hypothesis are greater than 10. Notice, stating that is not enough. They go on to calculate this. The pooled estimate for the proportion of resistant plants is P hat C equaling about 0.2835. The estimates of the expected counts are 17.29, 43.71, 14.74, and 37.26, all of which are greater than 10. So not only did they say that the condition will be satisfied if these values are all greater than 10, they then showed that yes, in fact, these are all greater than 10 and this condition is satisfied. Right. Lastly, we have our 10% condition. Because sampling must have been done without replacement, the independence condition for each sample should be checked. Information on the population sizes of cochea plants is not given for either 2014 or 2017. But it is reasonable to assume that each population has millions of plants, therefore it is reasonable to assume the sample sizes are less than 10% of the prospective population sizes. So there's actually quite a bit that goes into the explanations here on how we know each of these conditions have been satisfied. Now that we know the conditions are satisfied, we do the actual calculation for the p-value. Right? Using the pooled estimate of the proportion of resistant plants, P hat C, about 0.2835. The value of the test statistic works out to be approximately 2.21. Now, if you go to table A and you look up 2.21, you will get a p-value of 0.9865 approximately. because that p-value goes along with the proportion under the standard normal curve that is less than 2.21. The alternative hypothesis has it had a direction of greater than, which means we take 1 minus that 0.9865 and we get 0.0135. All right. Make sure you're finding the p-value, the proportion under the curve, in the direction specified by the alternative. It is very important. Lastly, in section 3, they make their conclusion. Because the p-value is less than alpha equals 0.05, there is convincing statistical evidence to conclude that the proportion of resistant plants in the 2017 population of Cochea plants is greater than the proportion of resistant plants in the 2014 population of Cochea plants. That's it. Notice they did not necessarily say that they are rejecting the null hypothesis. It's not 100% necessary. However, they did state that the p-value is less than alpha, and that because of that, they have evidence that the alternative hypothesis is supported. And they stated that hypothesis in terms of the context. Right. Are there any questions on the solution here? Did you guys that are here, did you guys all sign in? Yeah. He's going around to pick it up, so I don't want to miss it. Sorry. At least I think he's going around to pick it up. All right. So then, this is how the scoring is done. All right. We are essentially correct if the response satisfies components 1 and 4 and at least one of the remaining components. Meaning if you want to be want your result to be considered to be correct, like totally correct, you must have parts 1 and 4 and one of the either 2 or 3 within your response. So that means the hypotheses imply equality of proportions in the null hypothesis and correct direction in the alternative hypothesis, which utilize an appropriate population parameter in words or symbols. The 2-sample z-test for proportions is identified by name or formula. And then either of 2 or 3 needs to be there. Identifies parameters that are population proportions. Both parameters are correctly defined as proportions of resistant plants in 2014 and 17. The result in section 1 is partially correct if the response does not meet the requirements for E, but at least 2 of the components are satisfied. Incorrect if the response does not meet the criteria for E or P. So if you only have one of these things done, your answer will be marked incorrect for this part. In section 2, you will be essentially correct if the response satisfies components 1 and 2 and at least 2 of the remaining components out of the 5. So 1 and 2 are non-negotiable. You need those parts to be considered essentially correct. Notes that the use of random samples in 2014 and 17 satisfies the randomness condition. Checks for approximate normality of the test statistic by showing that the expected number of resistant and non-resistant Cochea plants are both larger than some commonly accepted criterion. For example, 5 or 10. Our textbook typically goes with 10. All right, the large counts condition is 5 when we're doing a chi-square test. Right, and this is for both samples. So we need both of these things at least, and then 2 out of the other 3. Right, so notes that the populations of Cochea plants must be extremely large in both years, thus satisfies the independence conditions. Reports a correct value of the z-test statistic, reports a p-value that is consistent with the stated alternative hypothesis and reported test statistic. All right. This will be partially correct if the response does not meet the criteria for E, but at least 2 of the 5 components are satisfied. Incorrect if you have 1 or less components satisfied. So again, there's some wiggle room on those first 2, right? You don't necessarily have to get all the parts to be essentially correct. You need most of it. Lastly, for section 3, this is considered to be essentially correct if the response includes the following 3 components, meaning you need all of this in the conclusion. It provides justification of the conclusion based on a correct comparison between a stated p-value and an alpha value of 0.05. Provides a correct conclusion consistent with the alternative hypothesis. The conclusion is stated in context. Right. So if the response satisfies components 1 and 2, you're partially correct. If it satisfies 2 and 3, you're partially correct. If the response satisfies components 1 and 3, and based on the p-value from section 2, either the conclusion correctly rejects the null hypothesis but does not state that there is convincing evidence for the alternative, or the conclusion correctly fails to reject the null hypothesis but does not state there is not convincing evidence for the alternative. Right, so there are a couple of variations on this being correct or incorrect. And if only one of those 3 things or fewer have been satisfied, it is incorrect. All right, so essentially they're allowing some space, so to say, for you to make a calculation error and still be at least partially correct. As long as you use your own work and make an appropriate conclusion based on the values you found. All right, so that can still be okay. Are there any questions? Is there anything I can clarify? All right. All right, so that was the entirety of what I wanted to go over today. I wanted to give you a little bit more about the exam, some strategy for the exam, especially on the free response questions, and a better look into how grading is done. So tomorrow we'll do a little bit more with review. I'm trying to come up with or find some sort of review-like game, so it's not just me talking to you guys, and it's not super stressful or anything. So that'll probably be what we do tomorrow. And then the next day will be the AP exam, and tomorrow will be the last time I see or talk to you guys, essentially. So that'll be sad. So if there are any other questions, anything you absolutely would like some help with right now, please stay on the call and ask. Get the help, get your questions answered. Otherwise, that's all that I have for you. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will see you all or talk to you all tomorrow.